Effie, thanks for joining the podcast. It's really awesome to have you here because you reached a point where you are recognized by Amazon Web Services, right? You are the certified AWS serverless hero. So this is a great achievement itself, and this is also the reason why I wanted to learn a bit more from your experience using the serverless technology. But before we dive deeper, and also considering that the audience could also include people who have no clue what this serverless actually means. So how would you explain to someone who has never really understood what does serverless mean?
Right. So, Michael, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And I'm usually, not usually, I'm always happy to explain about the technology. This is one of my roles as an AWS hero to explain about the technology and to promote it. So, serverless, when a developer is building an application, in addition to the code itself, it needs to think where the application is going to run. It needs to make sure there's a server. It needs to provision the server, make sure that there's enough memory, enough disk space, make sure that the server is protected. You have an antivirus, you have a firewall. There's a lot of things that you have to take care of before actually writing the first line of code. And if you think about it, it's really a lot of work that you have to do before actually doing something. And the main idea of serverless is to offload all of these responsibilities to someone else. In our case, it's a cloud provider. So it can be AWS, it can be Azure, it can be Google Cloud, and there are also other cloud providers. And, and the idea is that the only thing that you are telling them is, this is what I want to run. And they are smart enough. And behind the scene, they know how to provision the server for you, provision the operation system, provision the security, the disk space. Everything is done for you and it's abstracted. You don't need to know how to handle this. You don't need to know how to upgrade the operation system and how to connect the server to the internet and have an internet gateway. Everything is done for you behind the scene. I like to call it magic. Someone is doing that. There's a code behind the scene that is doing it for you, but it's completely abstracted. And the only thing that you need to adhere to is an interface. That you write a piece of code that accepts certain input. You are operating in that specific input and you are turning an output. And AWS, and again, other cloud providers know how to take this code and run the service for you that handle this piece of code. So if you think about it, the only thing that you are concentrating is writing your business logic. And the moment you know that the input is going to be, you're going to accept in the input certain values, you know how to handle these values, you're writing your code to handle these specific values, and you are returning an output that the AWS cloud knows how to handle. And that's it, you're done. You have an application that runs in the cloud, and you're getting all kinds of goodies just by using it. So as I said earlier, you're getting the security, and you are getting automatic upgrades of the operation system. You are getting all the networking that is needed. You are getting automatic scaling. So when you think about it, the first time you are writing your application, you're thinking about yourself. I'm going to be the user. But what happens if your application is successful and more users are joining the application and starting to use it? Now you have to start, in addition to the code, the business logic, the security, and all the things that you had to think about before, you also need to take into consideration scaling. How do I add more servers? How do I make sure that I'm able to handle all the extra requests? And again, the moment you're using serverless in AWS and in other cloud providers, these things, including the scaling, is being handled for you. You don't have to think about it. You just need to write the business logic.
Hmm.
And I think this is the main benefit when people ask me, when should I use serverless? And I think that serverless is, first of all, it's amazing for running POCs. When you have to check an idea, when you are, when you're creating your startup, when you are trying to build your vision, your idea, the last thing that you want to handle right now are servers. The last thing that you want to handle now are all the boilerplates that happens behind the scene. You want to quickly write the code, see if it works, get feedback from your customers, make the relevant changes, and so on and so on. So the moment you use serverless, your feedback loop is very fast because all you handle is feedback for customers, write the code. Feedback for customers, write the code, which is amazing. So this is really an amazing use case. I know many startups that start by using serverless. It allows them to run really fast and to get their MVP products to the market. And as time moves on and they gather more requirements and they understand the product well, they are able to start to optimize certain things. So, for example, they understand that this piece of code shouldn't run in serverless because serverless has its own limitations. So instead of using the serverless Lambda functions in AWS, I should use containers because it gives me possibilities that Lambda doesn't give. But again, running a container is much more complicated than running a Lambda. So before starting to run the container, you are able to gather the requirements, you understand the requirements better, and you understand that, okay, at this point, I should use containers because I understand the use case, understand the feedback, and I can, let's say, do the extra work and make it and then make it run in a container and get the benefits of a container because the Lambda functions doesn't give it to me.
It's very interesting, as you say, that the technology does the hard work for the developers and the development team. So then the question would essentially be, what is the role of the AWS consultants or the DevOps engineers going forward? Like, would you say that this serverless technology is replacing them into a large extent because it's now so easy and effortless, and the development team does not need to maintain the servers anymore? So what's the role of those certified Amazon or Azure, for this sake, or any other cloud engineers?
Yeah, so when using serverless, there's the idea of shift left, which means that a lot of the responsibilities that belong to other technical roles in the organization now move to the developer itself. So you don't need a special IT in your organization to manage your servers and your networking of the application. Instead, the developers can use the services that AWS provides, the serverless services that AWS provides, and using a very simple language that we call, you can use, for example, CloudFormation and other languages that enable you to define resources in the cloud. So instead of using these IT personnel to do it for you, you as a developer write in code the resources that you need, and AWS knows how to connect them together, make sure they know how to work together, and you as a developer is able to control the entire development process. You're not only writing code, you're also the one who is provisioning the resources, deploying them, and because it's much, much more easier as a developer to do it right. And the moment you are shifting left the responsibility, let's say you are able to ship less bugs because everything is under the same person responsibility. You don't have a person that is doing the deployment, a person that is provisioning the database, a person that is writing the code, person that is making sure there's an internet connection. Instead, everything is being done by the same persona in the organization, the developer. So yeah, I agree with you. In the end, more and more roles, thanks to the serverless movement, will move to be the roles of the developer.
Hmm. And that's interesting. Now, when you kind of enumerated what everything a developer could be responsible for, starting with backend development, then probably also front-end development, and then test automation, and that was already enough, right? But now we add on top of all of that also cloud formation and the serverless technology. Like, is this still something that one person can handle effectively? Because in some organizations, in larger ones, there is a trend to separate those roles into very specific ones. A front-end developer, a back-end developer, a test automation specialist, a DevOps engineer. So how do you see it based on your experience?
Yeah, but it's a great question, and I really think it depends on the size of the organization. I think that small companies, small startups, I don't know, I'm just giving a magic number. I'm not sure that it's the right thing. Let's say less than 100 people. I think that the developers can be responsible for everything. You don't need someone that is specialized in DevOps, someone who's specialized in all the other things. I mean, I think really developers can do. Again, I'm not sure it's 100, can be 80, but that's the ballpark number. And I agree with you that in big organization, probably you need someone who is going to take ownership of it. You need someone, for example, that is going to take ownership of security across the organization. So the developer itself is going to have the tools, going to have tools that will enable him to write more secure code, better code, but you need someone to define which tools should be used and what are the policies. And this is someone probably that is it's not going to be the developer itself. And I think that in a big organization, I don't think that the right name is DevOps or IT. I think that in big organization, there's a new movement nowadays that is called platform engineering, which means it's engineers that are building tools for the organization. So the developers inside the organization are able to deploy their code more easily, to test their code more easily. And maybe in the platform engineering organization, which is inside the company, maybe there are different roles there. Maybe you have someone who is more familiar with testing, and is building the utilities that enable the developers in the company to write better tools. But in the end, I think that the developers themselves are going to use tools, and they are going to take the responsibility for writing the test, to make sure that the code is secure. But you have someone in the platform engineering that is going to provide the tools to the developers that will enable them to do the job. So it's developers helping developers.
Interesting. And based on your experience with DevOps engineers and platform engineers, do you see any difference between these two, or can we just use this term interchangeably?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer. Right now, I'm in an organization that has platform engineering as a platform engineering group. And as part of the group, there are DevOps engineers in the platform engineering group. It's really a good question. I don't have a good answer. It really depends on the, I don't know, on the how the organization, how does he see the role of DevOps. I really don't have a good answer. That it's also it's a delicate question, because like every organization, there are politics, and up until now we had only DevOps. Now suddenly we have platform engineers. So what do we do with DevOps? So it's really a good question, and I'll be honest with you, I don't have a good answer here.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting with these waves and trends and hypes in IT. right? These come and go often. And I can imagine that people who finally got certified in DevOps, they want to stick to being the certified DevOps engineers, right? But also
So true.
maybe some other people are like, hey, I want to do something cool, and the platform engineering is the cool thing these days, So it's interesting how probably ego plays a role in these decisions as well.
So true, and I agree with you. And I think that we were talking about serverless at the beginning of the talk. I think serverless and serverless like services gives platform engineering the power to do what they do. Because platform engineering in the end is the ability to abstract the services that the cloud provider has to the developers that you have in the organization. And it's easier to abstract serverless services compared to other services. I don't know, if you have to provision your own EC2 and your own database, it's much harder for the platform engineering to do it. There's more work to do compared to, hey, let's use an RDS service that AWS provides and just give a very thin abstraction above it and allow our developers to interact with the database. So it really makes the platform engineering and also the DevOps work a lot easier just by using serverless.
Interesting. So based on your experience now, because you are the VP of R&D, right? So based on your experience now working with people within your team, how do you see the roles evolving over time? Like, are there some roles such as platform engineering now more trending? Are some of the roles fading out? What do you think is the future of these cloud roles?
So I just want to correct you. I'm not the VP R&D. I'm a staff engineer in a platform engineering group in Melio.
Okay, sorry, I probably just misread it.
But the question is the question is the right question, and I think I'm working in a Melio is an organization of around 400 developers, and more or less 400 developers, and it got one of its strategic decisions from around half a year ago is that we need a very strong platform engineering group because we understand that with so many developers, each one of the developers group, the ones that are developing the product, is using its own infrastructure, its own CI/CD, its own tools, and we need to see how we can standardize everything. And it's really a strategic decision here at Melio that we need platform engineering group that will take everything under the same roof and create the relevant tools to the developers. And as part of the platform engineering, we also have DevOps. DevOps are part of this group, and they are giving more high-level services like creating databases, creating secrets, things that are related also to security and cost management, something that the other developers in the platform engineering group don't do.
Interesting. So there are different sub roles within this cloud ecosystem, right? Some of them may focus on security, cybersecurity. So someone like a cybersecurity specialist, I guess, is probably also on your team. Do you
Yeah,
see over time, let's say over the last 3-5 years, have you seen any interesting trends, like some roles being more in demand? This is something that, for example, the recruiters listening to this podcast, they may kind of appreciate these kind of insights, like which roles are in higher demand, which roles are in lower demand going forward.
yeah. I think that the more and more organization moving to the cloud, and I think that the ability to understand, I don't know if you can call it a role, but I think it's a very important requirement for, I don't know, future developments or future technical personnel working in a technical organization, is to understand how the cloud works, is to understand how you architecture for the cloud, which is very different compared to architecturing an on-premise application and legacy applications. And again, because you have a other set of tools, you have other set of services that you can use to leverage in order to improve your application. So I think it's a skill that you need to know how the cloud works and how to architect for the cloud.
Mhm. Okay, okay. Speaking of some of these technologies, now I'm wondering, are there any specific keywords that recruiters can actually take into consideration when they look for these professionals? Like there is one, serverless, that we keep talking about. You mentioned cloud formation. So are there any other keywords that you would like to see on prospective candidate CVs if you would like to hire someone to join your teams?
Yeah, yeah. So I think working with cloud native services, for example, if I'm talking about the AWS ecosystem, so working with SQS. SQS is a serverless queuing service. Working with DynamoDB. DynamoDB is a NoSQL solution in AWS. So working with cloud native services is a big plus, and I think it's very important. And especially, let's say, working with SQS, for example, I think it's something that is good to know, especially when comparing it to, I don't know, working with RabbitMQ. RabbitMQ, of course, is also very important. It's also always good to know. But if you ask me, I prefer someone who knows how to work with SQS in the cloud and understands how a queue system that is cloud native works compared to something that is more on-prem solution. That's one thing. Another thing is the idea of the security model in the cloud, the idea of permissions and roles, which is something that it doesn't matter which cloud provider you choose, you have a very similar model of permissions, roles, policies, understand how things are working. Again, especially when you compare it to the legacy applications where security was more network related security, where you had firewalls, you had IPs. Here it's application based, it's cloud based, cloud native security, which is a bit different, which I think is something that is important to know and understand.
Well, you mentioned several interesting acronyms, right? The RDS or SQS. So I'll include some of these in the show notes. And as you say, it's quite difficult to kind of absorb everything, and it's specific to the particular cloud. But on the other side, each of the cloud providers, they cover pretty much the same aspects, right? Security, queues, etc., databases. So, for example, if you are hiring someone to join your team, would you have as a must-have requirement the certificate from the cloud provider, the AWS certified engineer, or are you like, hey, I don't really care, the principles are the same, we can hire someone who has certificate from Google, GCP Cloud?
Yeah, so I think that someone who has experience with Google, let's say with GCP or with Azure, probably has more experience in the cloud compared to someone who had just an AWS certification. Because it's very important to remember certification, it's always nice to have. Personally, again, I'm sure it depends on the person. Personally, it doesn't tell me anything about the person except the fact that he knows how to learn, to see it, to read documentation, which is also very important. But I think that practical experience with any cloud provider is more powerful compared than to just having a certification. Just
Mhm.
someone who has certification and doesn't have any real experience with cloud provider, is low in rank compared to someone who has experience, even if he doesn't have any certification.
Yeah, yeah. And how difficult is it to obtain such certification? I'm just kind of looking at some other courses out there, right? Some of them are English teaching or whatever, kind of skill. You go to Udemy and you get a certificate of completion, but some of them can be just weekend training programs for 10 hours or even less. So how difficult is it to obtain the AWS certificate?
Yeah. So first, it's not easy, and it really depends on what certificate you want to achieve. There are several levels of certificates. You have the basic ones and the more advanced ones, and you also have they're called specialty certificates. So I think that the more advanced ones and the specialty certificates are complicated, and I think just by memorizing the documentation, I don't think it's enough. You can always get lucky, but it's going to be very, very difficult. You really, in order to make sure you are able to pass the certification, you need to try things. You have to play with things. You have to create the applications. You have to work with AWS, because the more advancements are really complicated. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of questions on different edge cases, and without actually encountering these edge cases, you won't, except by luck you manage to choose the right answer, you're probably going to fail. I do recommend, I think, that when learning to the certification, do it in levels. Start with the basic ones. Then I think you have two basic level, or I think three basic level certification that you can try. I think there is a cloud practitioner, and there's another something in the middle. I think this is something that you can just read the documentation. Of course, try it, play with AWS, memorize it, and I think that it's actually feasible just by going to the different courses, pass these tests. But the speciality and the more advanced one, I think that you need real experience with AWS in order to pass them.
Interesting. So it's not as easy as some of those other courses out there because Amazon issues those certifications. Are there some other companies that also issue the AWS certified badge or the certificate, or is it just Amazon?
No, I think it's just Amazon. Yeah.
Okay. So once a recruiter sees someone who is certified by AWS, then it's kind of a confidence that the person
exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. All right, cool. So just thinking about some really interesting applications, you mentioned that startups, for example, use serverless to create the proof of concept or the MVP, minimum viable product applications. Have you seen some interesting applications outside of this startup world? Some larger institutions and the reasons why they move to the cloud?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, it's in the previous company that I worked in, where I was the VP R&D at Migo. So it's a company that built an observability platform for serverless application, for cloud native application. And the entire platform is built on serverless. Everything is, we use AWS Lambda, DynamoDB, SQS, all the buzzwords that I mentioned earlier in order to run the application. And we were serving hundreds of millions of invocations and transactions per minute. So really handled a lot of data. So this is a place where a serverless application really shines, the ability to scale really fast depending on demand. And in the place that I'm working right now in Melio, which is a FinOps company that builds a solution for small businesses to transfer money. And again, the application itself is built using serverless And there are, as I told you, there are hundreds of developers here at Melia. The entire platform is built using serverless, and we have hundreds of developers who are using the serverless technology in order to write the application. So these are really two very large applications that are using serverless with companies that raise quite a lot of money. So both of them are startups, but together they raised really hundreds of millions of dollars. So the products themselves are utilizing serverless very heavily.
Well, it's just mind-blowing to imagine those dozens or hundreds of developers using the serverless technology. And you mentioned hundreds of millions of requests per day or per hour or per minute, was it? Well, in any case, even per week, it's just a huge number, right? So
yeah, it was per minute. Yeah, and the number is very big. And in the end, serverless is a very trusted technology. It works.
Wow, that's just impressive. And have you also seen some traditional companies, such as banks, for example, shifting to cloud also? Because these are usually under some scrutiny of data protection law. So are they also taking advantage of the cloud?
Yeah, definitely. A Capital One, for example, large bank in the United States, are known to use serverless. I don't know if they're using only serverless to run the application, but they're heavily investing in serverless. So think about it's a heavily regulated industry that uses serverless, and they're using really the latest technology. So yeah, definitely. And I know also of several large enterprise companies that are using serverless. So maybe not across the entire company in specific teams, but it's being used not only in startups.
Awesome. Well, so the cloud is here to stay, I guess. There is no way to avoid it. It looks like, and some companies are just discovering it now, even though AWS has been here for what 15 years by now.
Yeah.
So it's here to stay. I guess the recruiters will meet more and more cloud engineers going forward as well, and platform engineers, as you mentioned. So speaking of recruiters, before we wrap it up, just probably the last question. Um, what is your experience with recruiters, and what could they improve in regards to making your life as the manager easier?
Yeah. So I think that we during this conversation think about how many buzzwords were thrown into the air, and it's very hard for recruiters. It's very technology-oriented space, cloud native, and it's very hard for recruiters, when looking at the CV of a possible candidate, understanding whether what he wrote in the CV makes sense or doesn't make sense. And I think that the ability to screen the possible candidates and better understanding whether the CV are a bunch of nonsense, just wrote some buzzwords there, and understanding whether the candidates were doing the initial talks with them really understand what is cloud native and really understand whether what they developed in the past is actually related to cloud native. Uh, Having more understanding this technology part more, I think will help, will screen possible candidates and will lower the amount of candidates that are arriving to the managers that, after a 5-minute talk, usually the managers understand that, okay, no, he's not the right person. So I was hoping that HR would do it for the managers themselves. And again, it's difficult. I really understand because there are really a lot of buzzwords here, and it's very hard to understand whether the candidate is just throwing buzzwords or actually had real experience with cloud native applications.
Yeah. Well, it's hard, but it's not rocket science on the other side either. So with some little effort and also by listening to someone like you, recruiters can learn. So thanks a lot for sharing your insights and throwing in some of these buzzwords so that we can get to know them. So thanks for joining. And is there any website or LinkedIn profile or something where people can connect with you if they would like to get to know you?
Yeah, they can actually on LinkedIn. I usually they are more than welcome to connect with me and send me an invitation, send me a message. I'm usually very responsive. It's just look for Epi Merdler. It's Merdler.
Awesome. I'll include the link in the show notes.
Right.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing all these insights. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you for inviting me.